Trash trophies, moral dilemmas, and the dog who just won't shut up. Please just shut up. This is Honkai Star Rail. Honkai Star Rail is Hoyoverse's latest project and the latest item on your bank account. And while it's getting rave reviews and a lot of people are really into it right now, is it actually good? And how does it stack up to Genshin Impact? Well, let's talk about that today and see which reigns supreme. Firstly, let's talk about how Genshin and Star Rail actually look really similar. Like, the UI is super samey and the gacha system is basically literally the exact same. Except for the weapon banner where there's only one weapon instead of two? Who thought that was a good idea? First obvious difference is the combat. While Genshin Impact is action-based, Honkai Star Rail is turn-based combat. The combat is obviously turn-based, but it flows extremely well. Now, since the only turn-based game people today seem to have ever played is Persona, which I love, seeing as how every article about this game relates it to Persona for some reason, let's talk about it like that's all you know. Persona made turn-based games a lot more snappy and quick. Long dead are the days of pressing through 8 menus to get to your attacks. Here, there are no menus, just 2 big buttons. And while that may seem simple, the complexity lies in the traces and traits of each character and how those skills interact with others. This includes the concept of breaking an enemy's bar, similar to that of Final Fantasy Persona. Do I think that the combat is better than Genshin? Well, they're different, but probably not. Genshin has a really fantastically unique system that is really difficult to beat, but that system is also kinda ass on phones. That's where I think Star Rail has the edge. Star Rail feels like a mobile game that's at the quality of some console games, while Genshin Impact feels like a console game being shoved into your phone. And I think this really hinders Genshin. The file size is absolutely massive, but the combat can be hindered by the mobile design too. And I think this is a core reason why the game kind of refuses to fuck around with in-game too much, because they know this would deter mobile players. And in-game is where I think we'll see a major difference. Star Rail already seems way more combat focused than Genshin, and that is obviously due to its snappy mobile design, but also because of the world design. The turn-based combat of Star Rail lends itself more to zone-based design versus the more open world exploration of Genshin Impact. This means that combat kind of has to take more of a focus here. Whereas in Genshin, you can explore wherever the eye can see, Honkai Star Rail has linear areas that are focused on obtaining chests and combat, and that's kind of it, aside from dialogue, of course. A lot of people are saddened by the fact that Star Rail isn't open world, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've played Genshin and experienced what open world design is before this. But that doesn't then mean that Star Rail has to be this, and I think that this is the first way that Star Rail sort of has its own design philosophy over Genshin Impact and where things really start to differ. Why should we expect Star Rail to be open world? The best turn-based RPGs, in my opinion, are zone-based rather than open world-based designs. And this is because you can make them tighter, including intricate dungeons, as well as stopgaps for mini-bosses and bosses and cutscenes, etc. Genshin can't have this, other than in domains. Now, don't get me wrong, the main appeal of Genshin is obviously its exploration. That's the thing that I think the game has always done excellently, but turn-based combat lends itself much more to a design that guides you, rather than a free-reign design. Now, this doesn't mean exploration is completely off the table with Star Rail. I actually think that it compacts things in a more neat fashion than Genshin. Every nook and cranny in Star Rail has something to explore or someone to talk to. Now, it doesn't mean that the world is as big, of course not, but it definitely means that there's a lot of meat between these bones. You know? Well, no. But again, this is how most turn-based games are. It's not necessarily just Star Rail that does this. You know, Persona also does this. The only other turn-based game that's ever existed. But again, this is a taste-based thing, and I think people should really think differently about how they see game design. Not everything has to be or should be open world, and there are plenty of merits to a more streamlined approach to design. One of those merits, to me, is how such a design affects the story. See, the Traveler is the protagonist of Genshin Impact, and I think that initially speaking, maybe not now, but initially speaking, that's a pretty huge problem. Usually when a game has a silent protagonist, they take a cast of characters around them to set the scene and be the main characters, right? And then you just exist in that world and react to whatever's going on. The difficulty with that in Genshin is that there's not really a larger cast that goes along the ride with you. There's just Paimon. And don't get me wrong, I don't hate Paimon like everyone else, but I do have issues with the usage of Paimon, and I think a lot of people have really caught on to these issues now that we're over 2 years into the main story. And it's that Paimon talks too much. But Paimon really isn't that much of a character in Genshin. Her main motivation is to help out the Traveler, and she starts to care about the Traveler a lot, and that's all her character really goes through. So you have a silent protagonist and Paimon, who speaks for the silent protagonist, but doesn't really have like her own motivations or development herself. This makes the main cast of Genshin feel stagnant and boring. Another main factor why I think the Traveler is a pretty poor protagonist of Genshin, at least in the beginning, is that we don't understand him at all. Genshin starts us off late in the Traveler's life, and while we don't know much about it, the Traveler obviously does. It's their history. And yeah, their journey starts off with some fragmented memories that they don't remember, but the rest of their history is, at least to them, clear, but we don't know it. This is a character that has a full history that we don't know about, and yet we're supposed to be them. And that places us in this awkward position, and Hoyoverse in an awkward position. Because if you've noticed, and if you play Genshin, nowadays you don't really get dialogue choices anymore as if you're the protagonist. It just gives you a full sentence that's like split in half that you just click on for the Traveler to speak. In all respects, the Traveler should be a voiced protagonist that just happens to be silent. On the other side, I actually think the Trailblazer is a bit better in terms of how to handle silent protagonists. Earlier I said you need a cast of characters around you, and while the Traveler just has Paimon, and in each scenario a cast of characters from that city that don't travel with you to other cities, so they're not the main cast, here you have the Astral Express crew, the Nameless. Himeko, Welt, Dan, and March are all pretty important characters to the story, and I would say they're basically the crutch behind the entire narrative, and they're there to guide the story while your main character experiences it and acts as a large supporting role for these more main characters, at least in terms of who speaks. This, I think, is a much better approach to a silent protagonist, especially one where you're given dialogue options. Wow, they're not just one sentence cut off. That's weird. Now, there is some weird stuff attached, kind of like the Traveler. The Trailblazer has like also kind of a mysterious past and knows Kafka for some reason that they know but we don't know. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the main character having a mysterious past that they kind of know about. It just makes you wonder, like, what do you know? Can you fucking tell us? Like, how do you know Kafka? Why do you like remember her, sort of? Is it just the feelings that they remember, or do they actually remember moments with Kafka? Also, like, aren't they just a surrogate person with a Stellaron inside? Or are they a real person? Are they like an amalgamation of memories from someone else? It is beyond confusing. I have no fucking clue what the Trailblazer is. I have no clue. But when push comes to shove and they're on a planet with the cast, I actually feel like I can put myself in their shoes. I definitely can almost never feel like I can put myself in the Traveler's shoes, because they are a character, just one that we press a button to make them speak. It's no mystery that I'm a fan of things that Genshin does with its story. Its large mystery box design to its world makes you ask constant questions and keeps you on your toes to examine every detail of its intricate, well-written world and lore, with its interesting characters to boot. That's what its world does, not its main story. The Archon quests, with the exception of the recent Sumeru quests, are way more dedicated to giving you busy work and moving you between places than they are with focusing on a grander narrative or hell, even focusing on its cast of characters. Genshin Impact's story, because of its open world design, is more about what's between plot point A and B rather than the points themselves. It wants to use its main story to introduce you to the areas and then get you to explore those areas now that you're interested. I mean, Liyue's quest is all about dragging you around the map to collect things, whether that be talking to all the Adeptus or collecting items from the funeral procession. It's trying to get you to explore, but if you look at its story and pacing, it's terrible. Liyue's Archon quest is by far the worst written because, well, it's trying to get you to focus on the world and not on the story. Even though that quest is somehow also verbose and slow, and Liyue's quest is just fucking ass. Star Rail, though, seems a lot more intent on making the actual points of A and B the focus, rather than what's between them. Again, the zone-based design of the world supports this, but also the fact that, well, Star Rail actually has an ensemble cast of protagonists. You have the mom and dad of the group, the bickering siblings, and a mascot that knows their place. And if that was just it, that would be okay. But the game smartly actually focuses on these characters. Each has an interesting backstory attached, and the game actually seems to care about developing these characters as they get central focus in each arc. I was legitimately excited when, no spoilers, the second world chooses to focus on the cast rather than just the world. Genshin is caught in this loop of disconnected areas that connect via a grander mystery. Star Rail seems to have disconnected arcs, yes, but they're connected via the main ensemble instead of the plot. This reminds me of some of my favorite works of sci-fi, like Doctor Who or Star Trek. These shows have the cast going to different worlds with their own stories and issues, yes, but they smartly choose to put the central focus on the characters that are traveling to these worlds. Getting to know the cast, developing them, and moving them in interesting directions. If we're just talking about gacha games, there's even one that already does this. I would argue not too amazingly, but it does it, and that's Granblue Fantasy. And that thing's been around for like 80 million years at this point. It's like the fucking Bible of gacha games. Genshin's boon is its world building, but Star Rail's is absolutely the Astral Express crew, and I hope they continue in that direction because it gets me extremely excited. Especially if they start like adding more characters to the group, which would be fucking awesome and honestly a no-brainer at this point. Also, give me my own room. I don't need a whole world, I just need a room. Just give me somewhere to sleep. So, since Star Rail is focused on its central cast, it also chooses to smartly end characters, while Genshin keeps characters in a perpetual purgatory. Genshin Impact still hasn't released a part 2 for any of its cast in the game, aside from the Archons, which makes every character aside from them feel like they have unfinished stories. This would be fine for a bit, but not for over 2 years. The cast is exponentially expanding, but seemingly nobody has seen an end to their character arcs or stories. It's really concerning at this point, and it makes me really question if the writers really care about their cast at all. Compare this to Star Rail, and I already feel like some characters have a finished arc. We've gotten multiple quests for some characters already, and they come to definitive conclusions without a hint that there will be more. Now, do I think that there will be more? Yeah, of course. It's a freaking gacha game. They need to throw characters in your face all the time. But as for a conclusion to a character's story, I feel like we have that with most of the characters from Yurilo 6. Compare that then to characters in Mondstadt or Liyue or even Inazuma, and for most of the characters, I don't know if they even have arcs to begin with. And for others, they seem to be stuck in a kind of story purgatory. It's not all amazing for the story of Star Rail, though. I think that the game is absolutely amazing when you leave the first space station. I think the first space station is a pretty terrible start. The section with Kafka is actually awesome, and I think that most stories will start themselves with one of the most important bits and then get you interested from that. So I think that the story around Kafka and Elio and the idea that there's someone out there that can predict the future and has a script about it really interesting and will play one of the most key roles in the future of the entire game. Kind of like how Genshin starts with a sibling being taken. That's the most important thing, at least to the traveler, right? So I think that the most important thing in the story will involve Kafka, and it'll involve Elio, it'll involve whatever's going on there. But aside from that, the rest of the station is bad. The introduction to March and Dan is not very good, as well as the other characters that are on the space station, like Asta and what is his name? Starts with it. Arlen? Yeah. It's fucking terrible. It's a scenario that's mixed with a ton of jargon and characters that are boring and flat, and a place that really doesn't depict where this game is gonna go. It's, I don't know. Not a fan of it. Maybe in another video I can like review the full first arc, but I really just am not a fan of it. But where the game really got me, where the main story really stepped in, is when you step on the Astral Express and you hear this song.
Let's go!
I'll be waiting.
Time to get on.
Till we make it. Oh.
I'm over here!
Come with me, take the journey.
Another issue is that only one character quest that I've played so far has legitimately gripped me in Star Rail, and that's Natasha's. As for the others I've played, Asta, Arlen, and Hooks, they range from bad to middling to pretty good. Meanwhile, Genshin has some really fantastic character quests. So good, in fact, that they're what made me want to retell them in my giant fucking videos that take 8 years. But if Star Rail can hit a stride with character quests, have their characters on each planet have a fairly definitive ending, and then continue telling the story of the Astral Express crew, well, I'll be ready to have a 7-hour Honkai Star Rail result video. No. Also, people are going to say it in the comments, but the music and design of everything here is obviously excellent too, just like Genshin. Obviously, there are different inspirations for each game, but I feel like that those elements of the game require a video of their own. Just know though that the Star Rail wins here because it isn't a copy of Breath of the Wild. So which is better, Genshin or Star Rail? I think the answer is that one has been out for 2 years and one has been out for 2 weeks. Now, I definitely do think if we're just comparing the starts of each game, they're pretty close to each other, but I might give the edge to Star Rail here, which kind of surprises me a little bit. I think that the combat has a lot of depth to it and a lot of difficulty too, and I think that this game is actually more hyper-focused on getting you to play the combat, which Genshin's not really about, and honestly hasn't been almost since the start. I feel like Genshin has just hit its stride when it comes to its storytelling and events, and I think that that is a special place for it to be, while I feel like Star Rail has already started out with a really good pace, which is kind of surprising. Like I said, I think Genshin's a console quality game put into mobile, but I think that Honkai Star Rail has really carved out its own space in mobile, and while it's being developed probably specifically for mobile, I think that it feels a little more cohesive than Genshin does. Genshin sometimes feels like it's all over the place, while Star Rail doesn't really feel that way, at least not right now. Obviously, we're only 2 weeks in, but based on how I see this game going, I think that it'll be a lot more focused than Genshin has ever been and probably ever will be. Hopefully it continues along this path until the very end of its journey. But I mean, it's all about the money, so it's not going to end. It's never going to end. Who's Elio? We'll probably figure it out, but it won't matter. Also, if you're someone who's interested in Genshin Impact and has really only played Star Rail, you know, like the 5 of you out there, I actually think you should check out my story videos. Genshin Impact has a ton of story out right now, and it may be almost impossible feeling to catch up. But if you watch these videos while you're playing the game and just skipping through the dialogue, you should be completely fine. And I actually think the videos are good, and they took me a long time. When it comes to those videos and this one, I have to thank my patrons. Thank you guys so much. I'm honestly surprised that I got any patrons after the last video. So thank you so much. The last video took me bajillion of years. In this video, not so much, which is nice. Hopefully you can see more of me, you know, because I'm not making epics every 6 months. Also, if you see these guys, is it Toma right here? I got him in Japan. I was in Japan for 23 days. And if you guys want me to like show like a merch haul based on what I got there, I got a lot. And a lot of it also is Genshin Impact. But again, thank you to the patrons. And thank you guys for watching. And I'll see you